My wife said she had a company party to go to, so I followed her and caught her kissing another man. She didn't know I had seen her, but that scene wouldn't leave my mind. She never expected me to come up with the perfect plan to unmask her in front of her family and announce the shocking divorce. I remember that night exactly. The sound of her heels echoing through the hallway of the apartment, the sweet perfume she wore on special nights, and the excessive care she took with every detail, her hair tied up like she only did when she wanted to impress someone, her impeccable makeup, the tight black dress that she knew would awaken my most primitive instincts. At the door, before leaving, she gave me a slight, almost automatic smile, like someone who was more worried about the lie than the scene. "Don't wait up for me, honey, I think you'll be out late." She had no idea that she would be followed that night. Her car turned the corner and I waited a few minutes before getting in mine. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe just a sign, a confirmation that my intuition wasn't betraying me. Everything had been feeling strange for weeks. Cold kisses, half-hearted apologies, the absence of her eyes on mine when we talked about the future. And then, like a well-placed stab, I saw it. They were on the other side of the street, laughing, as if the whole world had stopped for that betrayal to happen right there, in front of me. She was with him, hugging him, and then, the kiss. It wasn't quick. It was slow, complicit, like someone sharing an old secret. I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed, ridiculous, betrayed to the core. I returned home not knowing what to do with that iron taste in my mouth, with that image corroding everything I thought was love. I slept little that night, between images of the kiss and dialogues that never existed. She arrived at dawn, tiptoed off her shoes and entered the room as if she were the perfect wife. He pretended to be tired and turned to the side. I was there, awake, looking at the ceiling, feeling life crumble in silence. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because at that moment, a part of me, the most hurt, the most humiliated, began to plan. In the following days, I acted as if nothing had happened. I was kinder, more present, even more affectionate. And she, unaware that she had already been discovered, relaxed. She began to distract herself, to let her guard down, to not hide the signs of betrayal so well. The cell phone turned face down, the long showers, the deleted messages. Everything fit together. And it was in this daily theater that I began to set the perfect scenario for her downfall. I wanted more than a confrontation. I wanted justice, I wanted eyes to witness, I wanted to see the ground disappear from under her feet. She needed to feel what I felt. And I knew exactly where and when that would happen. Over time, I collected evidence. Screenshots of conversations, digital traces, saved audios with the names of recipes that didn't exist. Everything was archived and meticulously organized. But I wanted more. I wanted to expose her, I wanted to shout to the world who she really was. And the perfect moment came with her father-in-law's birthday, a family celebration, full of relatives, friends and fake smiles. She herself suggested that I prepare a tribute. The game changed at that moment. I prepared the tribute, yes. But it wasn't to celebrate anything. It was to destroy. As she organized the decorations, the party details, the invitations, laughing with me, hugging me, calling me, my love, I looked at her like a stranger, trying to understand at what point the woman I loved had become a lie. And perhaps the worst of all was knowing that, for a while, I really thought we had a solid marriage. That we had problems, like any couple, but that she truly loved me. I fought my anger every day, because if I let it overflow, everything could go wrong. The plan had to be cold, calculated. Precise as a razor. On the day of the party, I put on my best suit, fixed my hair with surgical precision, and smiled. I smiled as if I were the happiest man in the world. When we arrived at the ballroom, she was holding my hand, beaming. She kissed my cheek and whispered that she loved me. I felt nauseous, but I kissed her back. Everyone greeted us as the perfect couple, the example, the role model. If only they knew. And then, after the speeches, the hugs, the toasts, and the applause, it was time for the tribute. The projector was turned on, the lights went out, and silence fell. On the screen, I started with photos of the couple, trips, laughter, moments that seemed eternal. And suddenly, like a punch in the stomach, the screenshots, videos, and audios appeared. She started to laugh nervously, then tried to get up, but someone grabbed her arm. The audience was in shock. But that wasn't all. The video continued, and then she appeared, at the same company party, kissing another man, the same man who now, stunned, tried to hide among the guests. The room turned into a courtroom. And in the midst of the chaos, when I thought I had seen it all, a woman in the back of the room stood up, her eyes full of tears. "He's my husband." The impact was instantaneous. Screams, arguments, accusations. The cheating wife looked at me in shock, as if she had only just woken up from the nightmare she herself had created. The lover tried to explain himself, but his wife was already leaving with the children, saying that she would never forgive that. My ex still tried to reach out to me, said she could explain, that it wasn't what it seemed. But I was already done there. I handed over the envelope with the signed divorce petition. And without saying anything else, I left. The following week, everything fell apart for her. She was fired from the company after the scandal. She was rejected by friends and family. And me? I moved on. I slowly rebuilt myself. I met someone. Someone who didn't lie, who didn't hide his cell phone, who didn't go around saying there was going to be a company party. Someone who looked me in the eyes as if he were telling the truth, even in silence. And today, when I remember that night and everything that happened after, I no longer feel pain. I feel relief. Because sometimes, the end of a lie is the beginning of the truth. But the most unbelievable part of this whole story, the most unexpected moment, the one that would make even the most skeptical shiver, that, no one would have ever imagined. Because the biggest secret was yet to come, and it was revealed by the person least expected. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and will never romanticize betrayal. All the stories told are fiction, but they carry a profound truth: betrayal destroys, hurts and leaves irreversible marks. Our goal is to show, through intense narratives, how wrong decisions can ruin entire lives. Now take a deep breath, prepare your heart. Because what you're about to hear next is shocking, realistic and will move you from beginning to end. Good story. Daniel and Laura seem to fit together like two old pieces of the same puzzle. They met in their senior year of college, during a career fair that they both attended more out of obligation than enthusiasm. He, a civil engineering student, was reserved, methodical and kind in every gesture, even though he carried in his eyes a shadow of an unresolved past. Laura was spontaneous, with an expansive smile that seemed to light up everything around her. He was studying business, had ambitious plans and a charming way of making people believe in themselves. It wasn't long before they were exchanging numbers, then dinners, then trips, until what had seemed like just a youthful flirtation became part of a shared routine. It was years of mutual construction, patience and admiration. Daniel had always been discreet in his displays of affection, but the way he cared for Laura did not go unnoticed. He remembered dates that she forgot, made lists for her days and made coffee exactly the way she liked it, even when he was late for work. Laura, in turn, brought color to his gray days. She had a light-hearted way of turning any frustration into a reason to laugh later, and she was the first to celebrate every small achievement, as if Daniel's success was also hers. Over time, they bought an apartment together, not large, but cozy, with large windows and a balcony that she herself filled with plants. On the weekends, he took care of the house while she tested new recipes in the kitchen, and at night, the two of them shared the sofa in comfortable silence, as if they didn't need words to feel. Among their friends, they were the ideal couple. They were invited to weddings as a reference, the ones that would last forever. Their parents adored each other, and family gatherings were always filled with laughter, board games, and plans for the future. The wedding came at a time of stability, when Laura had already been promoted to manager at a multinational technology company, and Daniel was beginning to be recognized for important projects in the construction industry. It was a small, elegant, and emotional ceremony. Many cried when they heard the simple and sincere vows. He promised to protect her from everything, even from himself. She promised that she would never stop admiring him. On their honeymoon, they made plans for children, for trips abroad, for growing old together. Everything seemed so right. The couple's routine, as solid as it was not free from conflicts. Laura was extremely dedicated to her work, and with her new role came pressure, trips, and meetings at odd hours. Daniel understood, but sometimes he missed her presence. Still, he never complained. He kept to himself the uncomfortable silences, the cancelled dinners, the postponed promises. He believed that true love went through phases, that difficult times were not the end, but bridges. Laura, on the other hand, seemed not to notice this growing absence. Maybe because she was too caught up in the demands of her career, or, maybe, because she believed that Daniel would always be there, waiting, understanding, accepting. Over time, Laura started working later. Meetings became frequent, and weekends were no longer exclusively theirs. There were company events, get-togethers, workshops that required short but frequent trips. Daniel tried to adapt. He started cooking on his own, going out with co-workers, filling the time that was previously divided. In her words, Laura said it was a phase. That he was about to change sectors, that the pressure was temporary. He believed. Or I would rather believe. Because believing was more comfortable than confronting. And because, deep down, loving someone also means accepting their absences when you believe they are temporary. Even in moments of distance, Laura was still able to touch Daniel with small gestures. A note on the fridge, a call in the middle of the workday just to say you were thinking of him, a gift with no date. They were crumbs of affection that, for him, had the value of a banquet. He clung to this evidence as incontrovertible proof that there was still love. There was still a story between the two. Daniel, unlike Laura, always had difficulty sharing his pain. He was the type of person who kept to himself, who rationalized, who preferred to believe that everything would be resolved in time. His refuge was his work, his longtime friends, and an almost monastic routine of exercising in the morning and reading at night. In the last few months, he had started to notice more. Small details. The new perfume she wore to those company parties, the way she got ready with an excitement that didn't even appear on their birthdays. Her cell phone was always nearby, the screen always facing down. Her dry, hurried answers. But Daniel was meticulous. He preferred to analyze in silence, to put the puzzle together slowly. Because confronting things without being sure was worse than swallowing his own intuition dryly. And because, for him, the idea of losing Laura was like being forced to forget the sound of his own voice. At Laura's company, promotions came with challenges. A new director had taken over the department, and with him came different dynamics, group trips, and aggressive goals. Laura spoke of him with admiration, but always with that formality that hid more than it said. It was common for her to return from events with stories about him, about the right decisions he had made, about his bold projects. Daniel listened with interest, especially because he was not the controlling type. He admired his wife's intelligence, her ambition, and her leadership skills. But at some point, that shared admiration began to seem like too much admiration. A sparkle in her eyes that Daniel no longer saw when he talked to her about himself. In the building where they lived, the neighbors greeted them with broad smiles, as if watching an exemplary couple from afar. The woman from 402 always said that she hoped her daughter would grow up and find someone like Daniel. The doorman delivered Laura's packages with a compliment or two about how nice and polite she was. The image they projected to the world was one of stability, respect and affection. But inside the apartment, between the lines of the days, cracks appeared. There were no intense fights, but an invisible distance. Words left unsaid, half-hearted hugs, dinners with long silences. And, above all, the absence of a look. That silent, knowing look that says everything without saying anything. Daniel was still looking for him. Laura, little by little, seemed to have forgotten how to do it. To outsiders, their life was enviable. But Daniel, in his attentive silence, was already beginning to feel that something no longer made sense. That there was a disconnect, an absence that could not be explained by work or fatigue. Still, he remained firm. Because he was not the type to give up easily. Because love, for him, was a project. And projects are not abandoned at the first crack. However, there were nights when he took a long time to fall asleep, staring at the ceiling as if there were some answer there. On the other side of the bed, Laura slept peacefully, with her cell phone on silent mode, face down on the nightstand. He didn't know what it was. Yet. But something was about to change. Something that would require much more than patience from Daniel. Something that would start with a hidden kiss and end with a public exposure that would forever change the lives of everyone around. And maybe, just maybe, it was in that breakup that he would finally find the truth about himself. Because even the most loyal hearts have a limit. And Daniel's, as profound as it was about to be put to the test. The changes came like a subtle breeze, almost imperceptible, but full of omens. Those weeks that followed Laura's mother's birthday party were marked by a series of small gestures that, in isolation, could easily be ignored. But Daniel was no longer the same. Something inside him had awakened, not the naive distrust of someone who fears losing, but the full awareness of someone who is beginning to see beyond the surface. Laura began to go out more often during the week, claiming networking dinners, last-minute meetings with clients that went on until late at night. Sometimes, she didn't even send a message saying she would be late. She would return at dawn, taking off her shoes in the living room, walking silently around the apartment, believing that her husband was asleep. Daniel, however, remained awake, in absolute silence, his body motionless under the sheets, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, trying to organize his own feelings without letting them overflow into anger or hurt. He began to observe more closely. Nothing invasive, that wasn't his style. But he began to notice patterns. The coincident dates, the compatible times, the different aromas on her body, the perfume he no longer recognized as hers. Laura seemed more distant, more focused on something she didn't share. Her smiles came as protocol and her eyes no longer sought his with the same intensity. Still, Daniel maintained his role as a present, attentive, caring husband. Not by strategy, but by essence. He still believed, almost stubbornly, that he could rescue what they were losing. He made coffee before he left loving notes scattered around the house, called in the middle of the afternoon just to hear her voice. But the calls back, when they came, seemed automatic, almost rehearsed. And something inside him began to silently break. One Saturday afternoon, Laura announced that she would have an important company event on Monday. She said she would have to leave work straight away and might sleep at the hotel where the party would be held. Daniel nodded, pretending not to mind. But the announcement triggered something in his mind. She rarely mentioned these events so far in advance. It was always last minute, always with a tone of justification. This time, she seemed almost excited. She spent the whole Sunday sorting out clothes, checking her makeup, packing her suitcase as if she were getting ready for a special occasion. Daniel watched her every move from afar, without interrupting, as if trying to engrave an old version of his wife in his memory. That night, they had a light dinner. She was more excited than usual, talking about a new project, about the department director, about a possible international transfer. He listened attentively, smiled, commented, but inside the weight only grew. Something was coming, he knew. On Monday, she left early. She said she might not have time to get home before the party. She was wearing a dress she had never worn before, her makeup was impeccable, her hair tied up with the delicacy she wore at special events. She gave Daniel a quick kiss and left. As soon as the door closed, he grabbed his car keys and waited. He waited long enough so that she wouldn't get suspicious. Then he left in silence. He knew where the event would be. She had left the invitation on the table by mistake 2 days earlier. And she followed her instincts, but mainly her broken heart, to the hotel in the city center. She parked across the street and watched. For almost 2 hours she stayed there, the engine off, the windows closed, watching the hotel entrance as if she were a hunter on the lookout. She saw people coming and going, laughter, security guards, waiters. The party was happening. That was when, without warning, she appeared in the doorway. She was smiling, next to a man Daniel had never seen before. Tall, dark hair, neatly dressed. They laughed like accomplices, like someone sharing secrets. She touched his arm naturally, and he leaned his body toward hers. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly. He wanted to scream, he wanted to get out of the car and confront them right there, but what he did was even more painful. He kept watching. And then, as if the universe wanted to seal the moment with cruelty, the kiss. Not an accidental peck. A kiss full of intimacy, of time, of permission. As if there was no one else around. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. A chill ran down his spine. Every cell in his body seemed to scream. Still, he remained there, silent. She didn't know she was being watched. And now he knew everything. She went home without saying a word. She went into the apartment, turned off all the lights and stayed in the dark for hours. Laura only returned the next day, claiming to be tired, saying that she had slept in one of the hotel rooms reserved for the team. She told some stories, laughed, kissed Daniel on the cheek, and went to take a shower. He didn't react. He just watched, absorbing every detail. And there, in that moment, she knew that there was something bigger behind it. Because the kiss wasn't just a detour. It was the consequence of something much deeper. And Daniel, with a broken heart but a clear mind, decided that there would be no impulsive confrontations. This would be handled with the coldness of a surgeon. He wanted the truth, but more than that, he wanted justice. In the days that followed, Daniel began to record. He recorded calls, saved deleted messages, and observed routes. He discovered more than he had imagined. The man who had kissed her was someone influential in her company. It was no coincidence. This had been going on for weeks, maybe months. The messages exchanged, which he managed to recover from an old backup of her cell phone, were blatantly romantic. They met after work hours, used meetings as excuses, and hid behind the guise of projects. Daniel read every word with a sinking feeling in his stomach, but without giving in to the impulse. He had a plan. And that plan involved every detail meticulously thought out. He decided that the revelation would happen in front of the family. He wanted everyone to see, everyone to know, everyone to witness who the woman he had shared the last few years with really was. But not only that. There was something else. A piece of information that came up unintentionally during your investigation. Something Laura never imagined could come to light. A secret that didn't just involve betrayal, but that changed everything. Daniel didn't yet know how he would reveal this. I wasn't sure of the timing yet. But I felt that, amidst the chaos, this detail would be the final piece. The key to everything. The week before her father's birthday party, Laura was more agitated than usual. She rushed through the preparations, spoke to her mother every day, and organized a surprise for the old man, a tribute with videos, photos, and testimonials. Daniel watched everything in silence. He offered to help, and suggested that he edit the final video himself. She accepted enthusiastically. She had no idea that it would be there, in the middle of that family event, that everything would come to light. Daniel spent hours editing. He interspersed images of the family with small excerpts of her messages with her lover, carefully cropped screenshots. At the end of the video, he inserted a recording of her entering the hotel, the kiss, the laughter, the intimacy. As she smiled beside him, choosing songs for the tribute, he only thought about how her face would react when she saw her own mask fall. Not for blind revenge, but for justice. For self-respect. For everything she had endured in silence. The night of the party was approaching, and with it, the moment when the world she had built on lies would collapse before everyone. And even so, the biggest secret had not yet been touched. What Daniel discovered, at the end of it all, was even more devastating than the kiss. A revelation that involved not only her, but other people in the family. A betrayal within the betrayal. Something he still kept in his heart, waiting for the right moment to show it. And that moment was closer than anyone could imagine. The night arrived with an air of disguised celebration. The room was lit with warm tones, the tables were carefully decorated and the guests were already settling in between laughter and hugs. Laura walked around the room naturally, greeting relatives, organizing details with the support team and checking for the third time if the playlist was as she had requested. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed too calm. He was impeccable in his dark suit, with an upright posture, a polite smile on his face and a glass of wine that he held firmly but did not touch. Her parents were excited, the atmosphere was festive and nostalgic. Background music played discreetly, while photos from the birthday boy's childhood were projected on a makeshift screen in the corner of the room. No one, apart from him, knew that that night would leave irreversible scars. When the speeches began, Daniel remained silent. He waited for everyone to speak, laughed, applauded. When Laura was called to the microphone, his eyes did not blink. She spoke fondly about her father, about his teachings, about family Sundays and the values she said she had learned. It was ironic to hear words like loyalty, respect and truth from her mouth. As soon as Laura finished her speech, the guests applauded and then she gave the floor to Daniel. He walked up to the small stage set up in the center of the room with the same calmness with which he climbed the stairs every day. He took the microphone, thanked everyone for coming, praised his family, and said that this was a night of memories and, for that very reason, he had prepared something special. Everyone smiled, excited, already expecting another video with old photos, inside jokes and family declarations. The video began with images of Laura's father as a young man, then came her young children, her teenage years, her marriage to Daniel. It was like a documentary of a happy life. People laughed, some cried. And then, little by little, the laughter stopped. The images transformed. The soundtrack changed to something almost imperceptible, a dense, slow instrumental music. The happy photos gave way to screenshots. Text messages appeared on the screen, one after the other. The wife's name was at the top of the conversations, and below, explicit, affectionate, intimate messages, directed at another man. Soon after, a sequence of images from a hotel parking lot, footage from external cameras showing two bodies approaching, exchanging caresses, kissing. The audience, previously euphoric, fell silent. Some looked instinctively at Laura, others at their own feet, unable to face the embarrassment. Laura stood up abruptly, walked over to Daniel, and asked him to stop the video. Her voice was shaking, her eyes were wide, her body stiff. But he didn't answer. He remained standing, firm, like a rock in the face of a storm. He said that everyone had the right to know who she really was. The images continued for a few more seconds until Daniel turned off the projector. The silence in the room was absolute. And then a woman, sitting in the back, stood up. Her voice cut through the silence like a thunderbolt. She said clearly, even through her tears, that the man Laura was having an affair with was her husband. Everyone turned to look. The woman walked to the front, pulling two children of about 7 or 8 years old by the hand. She leaned against the table and, between sobs, said that she had suspected her husband of cheating for months, but she never imagined that the other woman was Laura. The scandal took hold like a silent explosion that, little by little, gained strength. Comments in low voices, shocked looks, Laura's father not understanding what he had just seen, her mother with her hand over her mouth trying to contain her tears. Laura, in shock, tried to explain herself. She said it wasn't what it seemed, that the video was out of context, that everything had happened in a moment of emotional turmoil. She tried to get closer to Daniel, to touch him, but he backed away. In a firm voice, she asked her not to touch him. She said that trust was like a mirror, once broken, it would never be the same again. Meanwhile, her lover, in the background, tried to leave discreetly, but was intercepted by one of the family's uncles who, outraged, confronted him right there. A commotion ensued, shouting, accusations, people trying to separate them. In the midst of the chaos, Daniel remained motionless, breathing deeply, as if he were holding on to one last truth. That's when he asked for silence. He said he needed to say something more. That he had discovered something he couldn't keep to himself. One last secret, hidden not only by Laura, but by another member of the family. He took an envelope he carried in his jacket pocket and opened it, revealing copies of emails, documents and an exchange of messages. He said that during his investigation, he discovered that Laura was not only cheating, but had also had a previous relationship with her own brother-in-law, her sister's husband, before she even met Daniel. The revelation came as a bombshell. The sister, present at the party, was in shock. Her eyes watered, her body trembled. He said he always suspected an excessive connection between them, but never had proof. That now everything made sense, the evasive glances, the justified absences, the conversations interrupted as soon as she approached. Laura's father stood up, shouted that this was absurd, and demanded explanations. Laura cried, begged, said that it was in the past, that there was never any feeling, that it was all a mistake made in her youth. But no one seemed to listen. The entire hall plunged into an emotional meltdown. Laura's sister ran out, in tears. The father, disoriented, asked everyone to leave, that the party was over. The mother, pale, sat on the floor. Daniel, still standing, took a deep breath. There was no revenge in his gaze, but a dense, deep pain that hurt more for everything he believed in than for everything he lost. He looked at Laura one last time and said that he didn't hate her, but that he would never allow anyone to destroy him so slowly again. That she had buried, with her own hands, what could have been a lifetime of love. He said he had given her everything, trust, time, respect, and that she chose another path. And so, from that moment on, they were officially separated. He took off his ring, placed it on the table, picked up his briefcase with documents and left. As he walked away, he heard the children crying, the adults' commotion, the screams of the lover being confronted by his family. And most of all, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. I knew that night would change everything, but I also knew it was the beginning of something new. Because deep down, even in the midst of ruin, there was one intact foundation, his own dignity. And that, no one else could take away. But what he didn't know yet was that the biggest twist of all was yet to happen. And that, despite everything he had already seen, there was still one final surprise that would change the course of his life forever. The rain fell lightly throughout the night. The soft sound of the drops against the glass contrasted with the whirlwind that still swirled inside Daniel. He had left the party without looking back, walking with firm steps, but inside he was carrying wreckage. Not because of the end of his marriage, that had already dissolved days before, but because of the impact that the hidden truths had caused on everyone around him. The silence of the street, interrupted only by the distant sound of cars and his own footsteps on the wet asphalt, gave him the feeling that the world had stopped. When he finally entered the apartment, he didn't turn on the lights. He walked straight to the bedroom, took off his jacket, unbuttoned his shirt and let his body fall onto the armchair as if surrendering the weight of his own existence. His cell phone vibrated non-stop. Missed calls, messages from known and unknown numbers. Family members who wanted to understand, co-workers in shock at what they had learned, even the betrayed woman who exposed her lover that night had sent a message thanking him for his courage. But he didn't respond to anyone. The next morning, the apartment was bathed in a cold, whitish light. Daniel calmly opened the curtains, made himself a hot, bitter coffee, and sat on the couch, his mind still processing the succession of events. He still didn't know if he felt relief or emptiness. Maybe a bit of both. What he didn't expect was to hear the doorbell ring. Through the glass door at the entrance, he saw Laura standing outside, her face swollen, her eyes red, and an indefinable expression somewhere between despair and regret. He hesitated for a few seconds before opening the door, standing firm in the face of her presence, which seemed smaller than ever. She had entered without permission, but he didn't stop her. He walked around the apartment in silence, as if looking for something that no longer existed in that place. Laura began to speak with a trembling voice, trying to justify what she called a mistake, a lapse, a confusion of feelings that had gotten out of control. She said that she never stopped loving Daniel, that she couldn't explain how she got involved with someone else, that everything happened during a period when she felt lost. He spoke between pauses, sobs, and restless hands. Daniel watched her with a strange, almost clinical serenity. He waited for her to finish, and then replied with sharp words, but without raising his voice. He said he did not doubt the pain she was feeling, but that suffering was not the same as the pain of someone who was betrayed, deceived and exposed. It was the pain of a wounded ego, of shattered pride, of the fall of an image built on lies. She reached out, trying to touch his hand, but he gently and firmly pulled it away. He said they had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. That what she had destroyed was not only their marriage, but the trust he had in the world, in people, in promises. Laura tried to insist, talking about the story they had built, the plans they could still make come true. But Daniel interrupted her. He said that love without truth sustained nothing. That what hurt him the most was not the kiss with another man, but knowing that while he dreamed of the future, she was acting in the dark, tracing paths that excluded him. He said he did not feel hatred, but he also no longer saw any reason to fight for something that only he supported. Laura cried like a child. She begged. She said she would lose everything, her family, her friends, her dignity. Daniel replied that those who lose something they never valued, in fact, reap the consequences of their own actions. She left the apartment with her face wet with tears and her shoulders hunched. And for the first time, he didn't feel like going after her. There was no more room in him for doubts. There was only one road to follow from then on. In the days that followed, Daniel began to reorganize his life. He asked for a transfer at work to another office in a nearby city. He changed the furniture in his apartment, donated books he no longer wanted to see, and redesigned the space with new colors, new paintings, and new energy. The nights, which had been heavy before, became quietly bearable. He began to frequent a cafe near his new work, always at the same time. There, he met Helena, a woman with a calm voice, serene eyes, and a low laugh that seemed to have been made to calm storms. They gradually began to talk, exchanging comments about the weather, their favorite cafes, and books. She worked at a publishing company and had the habit of writing in large notebooks, by hand. Daniel felt that there was a different presence there. Not the euphoria of a new love, but the peace of someone who knew how to listen, who didn't force questions, who respected silences. One day, as they walked together to the parking lot, she asked if he was married. Daniel took a deep breath and told his story, not in all the details, but with the honesty of someone who no longer wanted to hide what he had experienced. Helena listened without interrupting, just observing, and at the end, she said that she didn't think Daniel was a destroyed man, but a man who had survived. From that day on, their meetings became more frequent. Simple dinners, walks in the park, Sunday afternoons listening to music. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two paths that were slowly beginning to meet. Laura, in turn, plunged into a process of silent self-destruction. Her sister cut ties immediately after the revelation. Her father excluded her from the family, and her friends, even the closest ones, retreated after the scandal. At work, she was called by the board and dismissed for inappropriate behavior. Her name began to circulate for reasons she would never have imagined before. She tried to contact Daniel several times, but he never answered. She sent long messages, saying that she was in therapy, that she had understood everything, that she wanted to start over. But Daniel was no longer the same. He took no pleasure in her downfall, nor did he want revenge. He wanted distance. He wanted peace. The ex-lover also faced consequences. His wife initiated divorce proceedings, took the children to another state and filed a lawsuit for emotional damages and emotional abandonment. The company he worked for investigated his conduct and permanently dismissed him. His image, previously associated with competence and leadership, began to be remembered with contempt. He tried to reverse some of the legal decisions, but without success. And what hit him the hardest was the loss of contact with his children, who began to reject him with harsh words and unbearable silences. The scenario had changed completely. Everyone involved was in ruins, except Daniel. He, on the other hand, was rebuilding. The rubble that remained from what he had experienced now served as the basis for something new. He was not trying to replace memories, but rather to give them new meaning. He understood that he had loved intensely, but he also understood that loyalty cannot be unilateral. He began to write in notebooks, inspired by Helena. He wrote about what he felt, what he saw, what he learned. He discovered that writing was a form of liberation. It was as if each word helped to reorganize feelings, to understand that love, even when it hurts, teaches. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through an open-air book fair, Helena stopped in front of a stall and picked up a blue-covered copy with the simple title, About Beginnings and Scars. He opened it to the first page and showed it to him. It was Daniel's name as the author. A small, discreet, independent publication. He smiled, a light, genuine smile. He said he didn't want fame, he just wanted to record what he experienced. Helena squeezed his hand and said that was exactly what made him so special. At that moment, Daniel knew he was ready. That love doesn't need to be explosive, just sincere. That pain, when welcomed, transforms. And that sometimes, the most devastating endings are just the curve before the most beautiful road. What he didn't know yet was that that chapter of reconstruction still held another unexpected page. A message, left in his mailbox weeks later, that would bring to light a new truth that would change, once again, the course of his story. The morning Daniel found the envelope was different from the others. The sky was overcast, the wind seemed to carry a strange tone of urgency, and the streets were less noisy than usual. It was an ordinary Sunday in appearance, but there was something in the air that already announced that that day held another layer of reality. The envelope had no sender, it was just there, folded in half, without any external markings, among some routine correspondence left by the doorman. Upon opening it, he found carefully folded sheets, in a handwriting too familiar to be in doubt. It was Laura's. But unlike the previous messages, long, pleading, desperate, this one was different. There was a confessional, almost serene tone to it, as if she had finally accepted that there was no going back, that what remained now was just an attempt to shed any remaining mask. Daniel hesitated for a moment before beginning to read. He took a deep breath and leaned his back against the wall, feeling the cool concrete against his skin as a reminder that he was awake. At the beginning of the letter, she said that she was not seeking forgiveness, nor reconciliation. She said that she understood the harm caused, that there was no possible justification for what she had done, and that writing was her last attempt to at least tell the full truth. She mentioned the relationship with her brother-in-law as the beginning of a series of bad choices, made based on needs and impulses that she herself did not understand. She said that she had never felt proud of it, but that she kept it a secret, certain that it would never come to light. Until Daniel. Until that night. Then, the letter changed tone. Laura said that, in fact, that old relationship with her brother-in-law had not been an isolated incident. That he was the first man with whom she had truly become emotionally involved, long before she met Daniel. And that, during their marriage, there were times when she thought about seeking him out again, not out of passion, but because she felt that the world around her was falling apart and he was a strange memory of a life in which she felt free. Daniel clutched the letter tightly, anger pulsing like a silent flame, but it wasn't because of the content, but because he realized that so many truths had been buried beneath the life he had built with her. The final part of the letter, however, contained something more complex. Laura revealed that she had discovered, shortly before the party, that she was being investigated within the company itself for embezzling confidential information. She alleged that the man she had gotten involved with, her direct boss, had manipulated her. She said that he used the relationship as a way to obtain data that she didn't even know was being collected. And now, in light of the public exposure, the company had filed a lawsuit against her for breach of corporate secrecy. She was about to face a legal battle that could destroy her completely. Daniel remained motionless for long minutes after finishing reading. It was difficult to feel compassion, but it was impossible not to recognize that, at that moment, Laura was just a consequence of herself. There was a dilemma in his heart, to continue nurturing the indifference that had been built with effort or to allow her pain to awaken some shred of humanity in him. Because as much as he wanted to turn the page, Laura was still part of an essential chapter in his story. He kept the letter without a reply, but the weight of those words stayed with him for days. Helena, perceptive as ever, noticed the change in his behavior. He asked carefully, but without invading. Daniel, after some resistance, told about the envelope, about its contents, about what it caused him. She didn't judge, she just listened with calm eyes, and in the end, she said it was okay to feel. Which was not a sign of weakness, but rather that he was still whole. He said that forgiving did not mean going back, but moving forward without carrying the weight of resentment. Daniel thought about those words a lot during the week. He thought as he drove to work, as he listened to old songs, as he read Helena's texts. Until one day, he decided to go to Laura's parents' house. Not for her. But because she needed to close the cycle with those who were also hurt by her choices. He was greeted with surprise. His father, whose eyes were still marked by time and sadness, invited him in. They sat on the back porch, as they used to do before everything fell apart. Daniel said little. He said he held no grudges, but that he also did not intend to maintain ties. He was there because he respected the history they had lived as a family and did not want silence to be the last word. His father silently agreed. His mother did not come down, but sent a note thanking him for the visit. Daniel returned home feeling that a weight had been lifted from his chest. It was as if by acknowledging the pain of others, he was also releasing his own. During this period, Helena and Daniel grew even closer. They began traveling on the weekends, discovering new places, new flavors, new music. She introduced him to the little pleasures in life that he had forgotten. Painting with his fingers, sitting in a field and watching the sunset leisurely, writing letters for no reason at all. Daniel rediscovered the value of simple things. But at the same time, he felt that there was still something inside him that needed an answer. And it was then that he learned, through an old colleague from Laura's company, that her ex-lover had traveled abroad, trying to escape the upcoming legal proceedings. He had left behind his wife, children, documents, everything. Laura, now alone, was facing the biggest crisis of her life. Daniel was not happy with the news, nor did he feel sorry for her. He was only certain that every action, one day, finds its reflection. And that, sometimes, time is the fairest judge. The dilemma that remained within him was another. The letter, the revelations, the pain, everything led him to an emotional fork in the road. Continue to feed the memory of the fall or focus on building a new story alongside Helena. A story that didn't need to be compared to anything that came before, that could exist on its own, without demands, without a past as a shadow. And it was then that he made the most important decision of that cycle. He deleted all the messages, put Laura's letter in a box at the back of the closet and wrote one last letter, not to her, but to himself. A letter in which he said goodbye to the man he was. From the loving husband, from the betrayed partner, from the man who believed until the end. A letter of liberation, in which he stated that he deserved peace, that he deserved lightness, and above all, that he deserved to love without fear of being destroyed again. When he finished writing, he sealed the letter with a red ribbon and kept it next to the first notebook he started writing in. The one Helena gave him. It was the beginning of a new era, marked not by oblivion, but by the conscious choice to move forward. And even without knowing what the future would bring, Daniel was ready to live it with a clean soul. Because now, more than ever, he understood that the greatest act of strength is not surviving chaos, but deciding, with serenity, not to let oneself be defined by it. What he didn't know yet was that destiny, with its peculiar way of acting, still had something in store. One last revelation. An unexpected reunion. A final decision. That would forever change everything he believed about new beginnings. It was on a Friday morning that Daniel received an unexpected invitation. A simple email, coming from an institutional address, with the title, Closing Session, Documentary Project. In the body of the message, just one sentence: your story matters. And it needs to be heard until the end. For a moment, she thought it was spam, but when she looked closely at the sender, she recognized the name of an independent documentary filmmaker with whom she had exchanged a few words months earlier, during one of Helena's visits to the publishing house where she worked. He vaguely remembered being introduced as someone who had lived a powerful story, worthy of reflection. Helena, with that gentle way of provoking change, should have mentioned something about him without him noticing. The place was a small cultural center in the city's historic neighborhood, in an intimate room, with space for just a few people. For some reason he couldn't explain, Daniel decided to go. Perhaps to understand how strangers saw what he had experienced. Maybe out of pure curiosity. Maybe, deep down, because I needed to look at everything with different eyes. Arrived early. The place was simple, cozy, with walls covered in black and white photos and the smell of aged wood. He sat in the last row, crossed his arms and waited. When the lights went out and the screen came on, the silence of the room was replaced by soft music and a sequence of images from everyday life, hands clasped together, glances averted, letters being written, coffee cooling on the table. It was like watching fragments of one's own life. Little by little, the images began to become more specific. A narrator described the story of a man who believed in love as a foundation, who was surprised by hard truths and who needed, over time, to rebuild himself from the loss. Daniel realized that although they didn't mention names, it was about him. About every step, every gesture, every rupture. And the most surprising thing, other stories were intertwined there. Other men and women, also betrayed, also in ruins, also forced to relearn how to live. The room remained silent, but he could feel people's pent-up breathing, the weight of unspoken emotions. At the end, one last scene, the main character, sitting in front of an unsent letter, looking at the horizon as if he finally understands that the past does not define who one chooses to be in the future. The lights came on and, for a few seconds, no one stood up. Daniel remained motionless. Until the documentary filmmaker appeared at the front of the room and thanked him. He said that many stories were untold. That the pain of a betrayed man was often silenced under layers of pride and loneliness. That this project was born to show that there is dignity in suffering, and that self-love, however difficult it may be to rescue, is the greatest act of courage. Daniel stood up and walked towards him. The two looked at each other for a moment, and then the documentary filmmaker held out an envelope. He said that, as part of the project, one last letter had been given to him. It had been with him since the beginning, but he was instructed to only hand it in at the end. Daniel accepted it without knowing what to expect. On the way home, he held the envelope without opening it. The feeling was strange, a mixture of fear and need. When he arrived, he put water to boil, poured himself some tea and sat on the porch. The sky was beginning to darken, an orange hue was invading the horizon. He opened the envelope. It was Laura's. But not handwritten. Typed, with a simple signature at the end. The letter said little about mistakes. This time, she didn't justify herself. He just said that he had moved to another city, that he was living with the bare minimum, working as a clerk in a small bookstore, trying, somehow, to rebuild himself. She said that she had started writing too, not as a writer, but as someone who needed to empty what she carries inside. She said she had read his book, and that, as difficult as it was, she had found a version of herself there that she had never seen before. He finally recognized the harm he had caused. I didn't ask to come back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. She was just grateful that it was the mirror that forced her to see herself as she really was. And he said, at the end, that he truly hoped he had found peace. Daniel closed his eyes after finishing. There was no anger, no pain. There was a kind of necessary full stop. A discreet ending to a turbulent chapter. And he understood, at that moment, that even the greatest disasters leave traces of learning. In the following days, Helena realized that something had changed. Daniel was lighter, more present. Laugh more. They made plans with less fear. One day, sitting on a park bench, she asked him if he thought that life rewarded those who truly suffer. He replied that he didn't know if life was rewarding, but that it gave him chances. That often the chance came disguised as pain, but it was still an opportunity. Helena smiled, said she liked the way he thought, and then said she wanted to show him something. She took him to a small bookstore and introduced him to a woman with gray hair and a welcoming smile. She was the owner of the publishing company where Helena worked. He said he had read Daniel's manuscript, and would like to publish it on a larger scale, with a new edition, new cover, and distribution in selected bookstores. Daniel was speechless. He never imagined his story would take this turn. The woman simply said that sincere stories found their readers sooner or later. And that his was necessary. The weeks that followed were marked by a new phase. Launches, interviews, meetings with readers. Daniel was not seeking fame, but he did not deny that there was something deeply healing in seeing his pain transformed into something that touched other people. At a book signing, a middle-aged man approached him with tears in his eyes. He said that he had been through something similar and that, until he read the book, he thought that the pain he carried made him weak. He said that now he understood that surviving was, in fact, an act of bravery. Daniel squeezed his hand firmly and simply told him that he was not alone. At home, after these meetings, he and Helena would talk for hours, laughing, debating, dreaming. Their relationship had become a safe space, a refuge from everything the world could hurt. And yet, a living, real space, where there were also doubts, fears, but above all, conscious choices. One day, when they returned from a short trip, they found a note left under the door. It was from a lawyer. It informed them that Laura's case was moving forward, and that, since he was a named party in the case, Daniel would be invited to give a formal statement. His heart raced for a moment. He no longer wanted to be involved with that. But he knew that running away was the opposite of what he had always been. In court, a few days later, he saw Laura from afar, sitting next to her lawyer. She was different. Thinner, her hair tied back, and her expression tired. When they looked at each other briefly, she lowered her eyes. In his statement, Daniel was direct. He spoke only about what he knew, without exaggeration or omissions. He did not point fingers or blame anyone beyond what the facts demanded. When he left, he did not exchange words with Laura. But before leaving, she approached him. She simply said that she was proud of him. And that she hoped he would be happy. He replied that he already was. And left. On the way back, he felt that something inside him had finally settled down. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had learned that not all wounds need to heal to stop hurting. Some just become part of the body, like marks of battles won. Helena was waiting for him at the gate of the house, with a coffee in her hand and a serene smile. He got out of the car, walked over to her and hugged her tightly. A hug that said more than any words. A hug that carried the certainty that, despite everything, life was still good. It was still possible. She was still alive. The past remained where it should be, like a book that had already been read, that had left a deep impression, but that no longer needed to be reopened. Because now, what really mattered was the story they were writing together. Page by page, day after day, with truth. Take it easy. And with love. The months that followed were neither rushed nor slow. They were exactly the right amount of time for everything that needed to change to find its rhythm. Daniel, now an officially published author, divided his time between short lectures and events where he shared his journey. At each speech, the audience listened to him with rare attention. Not because of his eloquence, but because of the raw truth he carried in his words. There was a discreet beauty in the way he told his story, without pointing fingers, without victimizing himself, simply narrating the steps of someone he loved, who was destroyed, and yet chose to get up. Helena was always close by, not just as support, but as a living witness to a possible new beginning. She did not try to fill spaces or replace memories. She simply built something new, solid, with him, based on dialogue, freedom, and respect. They learned to look at each other with maturity, to laugh without rushing, to talk even when the subject was uncomfortable. The love between them blossomed without fanfare, but with deep roots. Laura, in turn, faced the full weight of her own choices. After Daniel's testimony, the corporate process ended with a clear sentence: guilty of breach of confidentiality and ethical violation. The fine was high, and her tarnished reputation prevented her from getting another job in the field where she had previously excelled. She had to accept temporary, menial, simple jobs, often humiliating for someone who had once stood out at corporate events. But perhaps what tore her apart the most was not her professional failure, but her loneliness. Her sister never responded to a message. Her mother, although less strict, kept her distance. Her father, once her greatest defender, refused to make any contact. And the friends she had left were shadows of what they had been. She tried to rebuild a circle of friends, but there was always the ghost of what she had caused. It was as if every new attempt at getting closer collided with the rubble of her history. The nights became long and cold, and her thoughts consumed her with regrets that no longer had anywhere to go. He tried to seek therapeutic help, and there began a bitter but necessary journey of self-discovery. Over time, he wrote his own book, not to publish, but to understand. Entitled, What I Became When I Stopped Looking at Others, it was more of a diary than a work. And perhaps that was his true punishment, living with his own memories every day. The former lover, on the other hand, became a wandering man. When he fled the country, he believed he would start from scratch, but he forgot that the baggage we carry is not just made up of clothes and documents. Guilt followed him like an inescapable shadow. He was rejected in several interviews, lived off favors for some time, and when he finally got a steady job, he couldn't keep it for long. He was emotionally unstable, paranoid, suspicious. The ex-wife filed another lawsuit, this time internationally, to guarantee child support. He lost visiting rights, he lost the trust of everyone around him and, most importantly, he lost himself. He became a quiet man, always looking over his shoulder, as if he knew that what he had destroyed could still reach him, even from miles away. Meanwhile, Daniel decided to take an important step. He bought a house outside the city, in a rural area, surrounded by tall trees and a porch where the afternoon sun hit perfectly. It was the kind of place where the noises of the world didn't reach, where life could be heard without interference. There, he and Helena created a space of silence and creation. They wrote together, sometimes they just sat down to read, sometimes they sat in silence, side by side, without the need to say anything. It was there, in that new space, that Daniel realized how much he had changed. He was no longer the man who sought explanations in the eyes of others, nor someone who needed to be understood to feel whole. He was someone who learned to be self-sufficient. To trust again, not in others, but in yourself. One late afternoon, watching the clouds change color, he told Helena that he was ready to live whatever came, even without guarantees. She smiled and replied that love was just that, a leap without certainty, but with courage. One day, during a talk about emotional overcoming, a young man in the audience raised his hand and asked Daniel what he would do differently if he could go back in time. Daniel thought for a few seconds before answering. He said that perhaps he would have listened to himself more. That perhaps he would have questioned himself earlier, faced up to it earlier. But he added that even other people's mistakes teach us about ourselves. That pain, when embraced, reveals a strength we didn't know existed before. And that, above all, he wouldn't change the ending, because it was exactly what he had experienced that brought him to this point. The audience gave a standing ovation. And in each person's eyes, there was not only admiration, but identification. Because deep down, everyone there carried their own scars. That night, lying next to Helena, he read again the first text he had written after the separation. It was crumpled, already a little faded, but still pulsating. He smiled, folded it carefully, and put it in a box with other mementos. For the first time, he didn't feel sad as he reread those words. He felt gratitude. Not because he was betrayed, but because he survived the destruction that betrayal caused. For choosing not to return hate with hate. For having built something new, not on the rubble, but alongside it, like someone who decides that it can flourish even after the most violent storm. If you've listened to this story so far, you've certainly felt every fall, every pain, every disappointment that this journey brought. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? What was the moment that touched you the most? Write in the comments, I really want to hear your opinion. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now, turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories, and share this video with someone who needs to reflect on the true value of trust. This story shows us that betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship, it corrodes homes, dismantles families, suffocates dreams and weakens even the strongest. It's like a silent poison that, once discovered, has already taken over everything around it. But it also shows that even in the face of the worst fall, it's still possible to find light. It's still possible to start over. With dignity, self-love and truth. And never forget, this channel does not support, encourage and will never romanticize any type of betrayal. Here, the truth is told so that the pain of many serves as a warning to all. Until the next story.